Hello and welcome to the reading from Agastya, the Siddha Principles, from the sacred discourses of Agasthiyar Vazhipaadu. Today, we are happy to have Sister Sumati Venkatraman with us, who will be reading, and between us, one will read and the other will explain. So, thank you for joining us. Sister Sumati, please start.
Today's topic is Temporal and Spiritual Knowledge. Gajaraj Swamigal, Father, Mahamuni, Great Guru, bowing to you, I request you to give me a simple explanation for the word knowledge. Sage Agastya, Father Ganapati, giver of knowledge, Vadivela, bowing to you, I desire to give a suitable explanation to the question my disciple is asking me. I will give you a simple explanation to the fantastic question that you have posed. Listen, it is not easy to give details to the word called knowledge. Knowledge is that micro material created by God that pervades the entire universe. Knowledge is of several kinds. In that, the greatest is the explanation given by the very source of the absolute.
So, let us stop here and we will talk about what Appa is talking about in this particular paragraph. He says, it is not easy to give details to the word called knowledge, and that would be something that is amazing, right? Knowledge is something all of us are very aware of. It's a very simple word, but why is Appa talking about knowledge as something that has it is of different kinds? Why? And what does he mean when he says knowledge is that micro material created by God that pervades the entire universe? What he means in this is that knowledge is not something new. The world, the created universe is already, has knowledge and it is all pervading. Only that thing that happens is we become aware of that knowledge or we connect to that knowledge. Now, what is this knowledge that Appa is talking about? This knowledge that Appa is talking about is the knowledge that is absolute or which is beyond doubt. Excuse me, which is beyond doubt, which we understand through our soul consciousness or connection to the supreme consciousness, where consciousness is all prevalent and we connect to different levels of that consciousness and we become aware of that knowledge. As my favorite example is, it's like radio waves. It depends on the radio station that we tune into. So knowledge is all pervading, and it is that knowledge that Appa is talking about that is in the universe which we connect to. However, he says knowledge is of several kinds. So what is he talking about? He's talking about the difference between knowledge as we know, and it can be intellect, it can be learned knowledge, which is also part of that, and a knowledge that is known by the mind or the created soul, which still identifies itself as the individual, rather than the knowledge that the soul begins to understand and become aware of, which is beyond doubt, which cannot be learned through books or through someone else. So there are different layers of knowledge. So intellect is different. It belongs to the created. But the real knowledge that we are talking about is that which cannot be thought, but which comes into our awareness based on our progress in the consciousness levels. I hope I'm making this very clear. We must understand when we say Sat Chit Ananda, Chit, that Appa is referring to is consciousness. Consciousness is different from acquired knowledge, which is intellect, which is connected with the ego. where the mind works. So the main difference between these two types of knowledge, temporal and spiritual knowledge, is that temporal knowledge is learned. It is that knowledge we begin when we are born as babies and we cry, and we understand if we cry, then we are fed, or we are, they change the diapers. And then as we grow, we understand, okay, we can do this, we cannot do that. We understand what is history, geography in the school. Everything is connected to the created world alone. But spiritual knowledge is that which one becomes aware of as we begin to go beyond the mind, beyond the intellect, and are able to connect to higher truths, which once it becomes, once you become aware of it within yourself, there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt. I would say one of the most easiest way to understand this is your intuition. Your intuition is something that comes from the soul, from that kind of inner knowledge that does not rely on external factors. So intellect and learned knowledge or temporal knowledge relies on external factors. Spiritual knowledge is through one's own awareness alone. So there might be a question, okay, so we read all these Vedas and Upanishads and the Bible and all those religious texts. We are still learning it through our mind. We are reading it or listening to it, explanations, or just understanding it. But true understanding of the meaning and the layers of meaning of that it starts flowering within you when you look at it, or when you even just listen to it. For example, I do not know Sanskrit. So when my awareness or my consciousness said, listen to Sri Lalita Sahasraramam, and I just listen to my feelings. Like I always say, listen to your feelings. That's one good way of getting beyond the obstacles of the ego or the mind that holds you in this created world. I just listen to it without any judgment. Just listen to it. And the inner meaning of some of those passages became very clear. Nobody explained it to me. I don't know Sanskrit. So that kind of knowledge is beyond language, and it is beyond all limits of the created world. So that is the difference we have to first understand before we go forward in this particular chapter. Then Appa also says, in that the greatest is the explanation given by the very source of the absolute. So what is he talking about? He is talking about that inherent knowledge that has been brought to this world through, we'll say the Vedas. Because what is happening here is the supreme knowledge is being converted to the knowledge that can be understood in the created world. But for someone who is able to understand the inner meanings of these things, then there is no doubt. So that which is the supreme knowledge is beyond all doubt. Because when you know it, you will not ask someone else, or you will not try to research about it or read about it, because you become aware of it. So that is why, I read something recently. Who was talking about between people who are illiterate and literate. And somebody asked, how can an illiterate person understand knowledge? And Ramana Maharshi very clearly stated, for an intellectual literate person, trying to get rid of all the learned knowledge is hard. They're all barriers. For an illiterate person whose only idea is about eating and drinking and surviving, and also one who's blessed with the idea of devotion or bhakti, pure knowledge begins to form. It doesn't mean that everybody who's illiterate is going to become great, but depending on each person's past lives and the samskara, a person may be born illiterate in this world, But because of what kind of life they have led of dharma, they don't even need to read books. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa did not need to read anything. He understood what Christ thought just by contemplating on Christ for a whole year. And that is how it is. So even in your daily life, as you progress in sadhana, suddenly something will just strike in your mind. And then you'll say, oh my God, this is what this means. Because you're understanding not the surface of anything that has been said, but you understand the inner meaning of these divine words. So let's continue, Sister Sumati.
Yeah. An explanation about this was given to Brahma by Mahabrahma for all the 3 ages. As time passed and as those that lived on earth changed, different explanations appeared that were relevant to the situation. As the explanations became many, and those that explained this varied, and the meaning differed, yet understand that all this knowledge is like the flowers that have flowered on a tree that has deep roots and hence cannot be shaken.
Now, what does Appa say in this? Very important paragraph again. He says, as time passed and those that lived on earth changed, different explanations appeared that were relevant to the situation. This is important. What is the most key words here? Relevant to the situation. So even though that knowledge is the absolute, after it was converted to, say, Vedas or the Bible, based on our understanding of that absolute knowledge, it is as time passed, the understanding or the explanation kept changing. So what was understood and explained and followed in thousands of years ago does not become relevant to the modern India, which is very different now. The basic truths never change. Truth does not change. But the way they are explained, the way they are understood, and the way they are followed, that changes depending on the situation at that particular period in the created universe or this world. So he says, as the explanations became many, and those that explained this varied, and the meaning differed, yet all that knowledge is like flowers that have flowered in a tree that has deep roots and hence cannot be shaken. So what Buddha thought, what Buddha understood and explained, what Christ understood and explained, what the Vedas how the Vedas were received and explained, that main truths do not change and they remained constant. That is why we see all these explanations, even though they differ superficially in many things and come out as Buddhism or Christianity or Hinduism, they all come from that very root. There's only one truth. And the highest truth, once you become aware, is love. Because once you become aware that everything in this created world is part of the same absolute that you are part of, then there can be nothing other than love. And love then becomes the foundation. And what happens when one starts living based on the idea of love? Your whole behavior and your thought and everything changes. You begin to live a righteous life. You do not want to hurt anybody else. You do not want to do something that is perceived as wrong, which may be negative, have negative consequences. So true knowledge is that which unites, which brings us all together because it teaches us that we are all one. It is that knowledge which helps us understand even the trees and the rock and the animals. Everything belongs to that same absolute that we belong to. They're all our brothers and sisters. So true knowledge does not divide. There is no religion, or not religion, I would say spiritual truth, which will say my truth is better than your truth. There is only one truth. It's just the way people understand and explain and then misunderstand and act is different. So you have to pay notice to that particular sentence there. The way people understand and express and the way people misunderstand and express is different. So there lies all this, differences between people, which shouldn't have happened. When one is able to understand this higher knowledge through one's inner awareness. Go ahead.
Well, the flowers are many, and yet the tree is one. Isn't the taste of the fruit from that tree unique? We call the knowledge that the Vedas expound as temporal knowledge. The other type of knowledge is spiritual knowledge. Temporal knowledge is that which is written by man and written in books. It is the knowledge that one learns by being taught by others. The explanation is given by the guru or book or through what others say. Spiritual knowledge is that which is knowledge beyond this. This type of knowledge is normally not known by reading or by listening. This type of knowledge emerges by itself from within. There is a connection between the mind and the soul.
So let us go back and look at these two paragraphs. What does Appa says? We call the knowledge that the Vedas expound as temporal knowledge. Now, we have just talked about it. Why is he calling Vedas temporal knowledge? Because Vedas, as most of us know, is divine words, right? The other type of knowledge is spiritual knowledge, he says. So what is it? Again, we go back to what he said earlier, which is what is received from within. That is what happened. The rishis received the divine words from within or the knowledge from within, and they wrote it down. What was written down is temporal knowledge and expressed as temporal knowledge because it is something that is learned. But he says, so temporal knowledge is that which is written by man. So these things, even the Vedas, were written down by man, and it is written in books or palm leaf manuscripts. It is that knowledge that one learns by being taught by others. The explanation is given by the guru or a book or through what others say. So this is what we were talking about. We cannot, understand true knowledge when we are simply listening to what a guru explains, or we read in the books, or hearing explanations from others. That is still temporal knowledge because we are just understanding what has been received, what has been expressed in the constraints of human language, and what someone understands, reading that, someone else understands about it. Then using that understanding, they are teaching us. So you see the different layers here. So it is almost like it is going through different channels, different funnels, and coming out sometimes very differently if it is meaning is misunderstood, and sometimes with close to the truth, but not the true truth or the absolute truth. And that is why when we are, relying more on the temporal knowledge, when we are relying more on what someone else says, we are still very much in the lower level of our sadhana. But I'm not saying it's wrong. That is why Vazhipaadu was given. That is why Vedas were given. It is very important for the beginning stages. All these are merely tools. The great divine texts, the hymns, everything contain the truth. They are all tools. But how we take those tools and because of the tools begin to understand ourselves, begin to open up our consciousness, and begin to invite or become aware of that spiritual knowledge is the whole idea behind understanding what is difference between spiritual knowledge and temporal knowledge. So Appa says, spiritual knowledge is that which is knowledge beyond all this, beyond the written word, beyond the heard word. It is knowledge that you become aware in your consciousness. This type of knowledge is not normally not known by reading or by listening. This type of knowledge emerges by itself from within. And then he goes on to say there is a connection between the mind and the soul. So let us see what he says in connection with that. Go ahead, Sister Sum.
Yeah. From the depths of the mind, the soul gives the knowledge to the gross body that surrounds it. In such a case, the knowledge that is given by the soul as it comes through the mind of the human may get mixed up with the knowledge that he has learnt. I will give you another explanation to this. Listen. When it rains, water runs like a river and reaches the ocean. As it proceeds, it collects some material that is not related to it, that is found on its way. In the same way, the temporal knowledge that man has gets mixed up with the spiritual knowledge when it emerges.
So here, let's go back. And I'm going to go ahead and read that again because it is so important. He says, from the depths of the mind, he first starts with there is a connection between the mind and the soul. From the depths of the mind, the soul gives the knowledge to the gross body that surrounds it. In such a case, the knowledge that is given by the soul, as it comes through the mind of the human, may get mixed up with the knowledge that he has learned. I'll give you another explanation to this. Listen, he says, why does he do that? Because he knows that giving an explanation makes it much more clearer to us. So he says, when it rains, water runs like a river and reaches the ocean. As it proceeds, it collects some material that is not related to it, that is found on its way. In the same way, the temporal knowledge that man has gets mixed up with the spiritual knowledge when it emerges. So this is what we have been talking about. So there is a connection between the mind and the soul. There is a connection between the mind, body, and the soul. As long as we exist in this world, there's always that connection. To get rid of that connection is to become liberated. And that is not something any of us are at this stage, or we are just progressing towards that idea. So here he says, from the depths of the mind, the soul gives knowledge to the gross body that surrounds it. In such a case, that knowledge is that is coming from the soul. It gets mixed up with the mind of the human and the knowledge that he has acquired through his lifetime. And then it comes up, mixes up with that spiritual knowledge and it emerges. So that is what is happening when you're learning from other texts. When you're learning from someone else, it is getting mixed up with their own understanding, their own knowledge, and it emerges a little mixed up. It's like the water in the river. When it emerges from the depths of the ground, it's pure, it's clean, but as it goes, it collects all the rocks and dirt, and before it enters the ocean, it has already got mixed up with a lot of things that is found on the side of the or in the depths of the river. So that is how each one of us are. So true spiritual progress is not about learning. True spiritual progress is about unlearning. What we need, it is like peeling layer and layer of learned knowledge to begin to understand that we cannot rely on written books, or trying to understand that using the written books or the words that are said, and then beginning to understand the real truth within. The way the real truth emerges is very, very important. You got to remember that when you begin to start listening to your feelings without allowing your mind to come between you and your feelings, because what happens is, knowledge emerges. And sometimes let us say something simple as like an intuition. It says, oh, that person, there is something that is not good about that person, but you kind of say, no, society dictates that I cannot be rude to the person, I got to be there. And then you go talk to the person, and then the conversation escalates because the mind has come in between and said, don't listen to your soul because the society is like this. This is what the norms say. So the learned knowledge is dictating what you should do. But when you begin to start looking at yourself and begin to act based on your intuition, based on your feelings, without fear, without doubt, then true knowledge begins to emerge. You begin to act based on the true knowledge. And that is the difference we must learn as we go forward. Go ahead, sister.
Yeah. It is only when man keeps his mind pure, like milk, based on his actions, does the knowledge that comes through it remain white. If one wants to gain that pure knowledge through his soul, then his mind must be pure. Thinking of the absolute, when you sit in meditation and melting that memory of the absolute in your heart, when you keep your mind without any dirt and reach the state of void, which is when there is a compatibility between the mind and the soul.
So let's go back and look at this. So what does he say? So how can we invite higher knowledge? By purifying ourselves. Because remember, everything is energy, right? So the more and more we become conscious of that energy, become purer in our action and what we do, we begin to tune in without our own knowing towards higher levels of knowledge. And when we become completely pure, which is what we are all trying to do, but then the process itself is also important. So don't worry about it. Just because you're a spiritual person, you are not 100% perfect. It's okay not to be 100% perfect, because the importance is in the process. Remember why we were created. We were created to express and experience. And unless you experience everything, that process of experiencing and expressing is what is going to lead you forward. You cannot create something out of void. So in order for you to understand yourself, your true self, you have to go through life. You have to go through the challenges of life. You have to go through all the different emotions and feelings and all that comes through through you. And you go through suffering and joy, and through that experience and understand. And so as we do that, as we understand the absolute truth of what exactly it is all about, what are the tools that we need to become purer, we start changing the way we think, changing the way we behave. And as we continue to become purer, then true knowledge begins to emerge. So he says, thinking of the absolute, when you sit in meditation and melting that memory of the absolute in your heart, when you keep your mind without any dirt and reach the state of void, which is where there is which is when there is a computability between the mind and the soul. So, the mind and the soul are constantly in kind of a friction, because the soul tells you to do something, but the mind tries to override it. Why is that? Because as long as the mind functions, you remain in this existed world. So for one to actually want to be liberated from this world is hard, because of the fact that the self finds it very hard to let go of the idea of the self, of the need to express and experience. As long as that desire to experience and express and learn and all that continues, the mind continues to reign supreme. The mind continues to try to tell you not to do what the soul tells you. The soul is always hankering to become pure. The soul's right from the time we take birth, there's always the deep-rooted desire to return to our divinity, to our true self. That is why the most famous film actors or the richest men towards the end of their life realize there is nothing. That not all the homes that they have, not all those riches that they have gives them satisfaction, because that total satisfaction can only come when the soul realizes its true self, or its true idea of the divinity that it is. So we must understand the difference between temporal knowledge and spiritual knowledge. And as spiritual aspirants, begin to listen to your feelings, and do not doubt it. Have faith. If you believe in a guru or a god, have faith, because they are higher powers. So why is it important to believe in a guru or a god or something higher than yourself? Because again, when you are reading a spiritual book like Vazhipaadu or Vedas or the Bible, you're connecting to the consciousness of that being that gave you those words. So stop looking at it as mere books and mere words. Begin to understand the essence behind those words, that who gave you those words. And as you begin to connect, you also begin to change. Your awareness begins to change. It's like having something stronger and you connecting to it, so that that strength is also something that flows through you. So when you're reading anything, when you're listening to hymns, Lalita Sahasranamam is not just a chanting of 1,000 names of the Adi Parashakti. It is the key to liberation. In it is inherent different truths. Everything that we need to know in terms of creation, it has the key to a very specific breathing technique that can help you go forward. And is that written down in any books? No, it's not. These are things that will begin to become apparent within you when you begin to start listening to your soul and begin to let your mind recede a little bit at a time. What Appa's talking about is when you sit in meditation and melt into the memory of the absolute in your heart and reach the state of void. That is a very, very high state that we will all reach, but we are still in the process of going. So with this, even though this is a huge chapter, we're going to stop today, and then we will continue when we resume our Zoom meetings. So thank you everyone for joining me today, and we will see you the next time. Okay.